The pair of us lads had been watching to see when the lorry might slow down as it left the track leading away from the refinery. With a yell, my friend Kareem suddenly let go and fell off the back, onto the verge in a cloud of dust. He rolled over and stood up to wave, so now I was alone and it was up to me. I had seen how he had planned his drop and waited on the back edge until I felt the driver change gear with a crunch and a familiar jolt and had just let go. I landed on my feet but had to stagger onwards to stop falling over until I could slow down enough to walk. I had landed on a real road and just carried on in the same direction. After a while I could see a cluster of buildings in the distance as I walked onwards and I could hear some shouting. I then saw ahead of me a crowd of people standing in front of the double gates of a long wired fence running parallel to the seashore, the ocean gleaming bright blue as far as I could see beyond, in stark contrast to the white of the thick wooden posts supporting it. It was really beautiful and just what we had both been dreaming about for so long at home. What was not so good was the number of men in navy blue uniform armed with guns, helped by a number of large dogs, who were dragging men out of the melee and driving them away from the rest of the crowd. All about the gates were a number of women in black burqas with a scattering of children, mostly very silent but a few crying noisily. Way over to their left was a much larger group but of only men, jostling amongst themselves to shout to the women. It must have meant that some men had been there all day and that their families had left already by boat, leaving them behind. That was doubly shattering as Kareem and I had spent over 5 long weeks from leaving our home village to get to this point, much by plane walking each night out of the heat of the day and the very occasional lucky lift from a friendly lorry driver. Though the last one did not know it, whilst he was refueling, the two of us had climbed over the back of the truck and got under the tarpaulin cover without asking him. Kareem and I had heard at home that you could get on a boat from the coast which would take you across the Mediterranean to Italy. That was a dream we both had had for months, as apart from herding goats, there was no work for either of us in the village, but Italy, we were told, truly had everything. Once there, I hoped be able to prove to my mother and 3 sisters that I was a success. I was sad to leave them behind, but trying to live in our small hut with the 4 women was getting impossible. We were cramped all the time and could not afford to move house since my father had died last year. I stood in the cool shadow of one of the buildings wondering what to do. As I watched, the gates were opened and a steady trickle of people was passing through. It took me a while to realize that every one was a burqa-clad woman. There was not a single man amongst them. As I watched, I was joined in the shadow by 2 families who too had walked there along the road. A couple of the women had bundles on their heads which they were clearly very happy to put on the ground. Their husbands went over to the crowd to find out what to do, but it was not long before they were back, looking really weary. They did not know what to do. The women and children could join the crowd, but no men. Perhaps another boat later today would take them separately, or maybe not. That became a lengthy argument amongst them all, though the children just stood watching everything silently. Should the women take them and join the crowd and hope that the men could join them at some time later? The large group of men were being forced to move farther away from the women and children and to cross the road, near to where we were. Suddenly a baby girl tottered out of the women's group crying for her daddy, just as a motorcyclist swept towards us. I drove my heel into the wall behind me and launched across the road, crashing into her, just before the machine could do so. We knocked a couple of women over, to the annoyance of the guards, who thought that they had everything sorted out and shouted and fired after the fast disappearing machine. Some of the women helped me to my feet and the baby's mother scooped her up and soothed her cries and thanked me emotionally for my rescuing. I said it was nothing whilst dusting myself down and then quickly crossed back over the road before an approaching guard had a chance to hit me back. In the shade of the buildings I propped myself up against a wall, looking back at the crowd. Until then I had not grasped that there must have been twice as many women as children, their hijabs masking their ages. They were not all mothers. In fact, apart from the young children there were a couple of teenagers and at least a dozen young women. Suddenly my thoughts about what to do next were interrupted. "Hello, my name is Malika, what's yours?" "Samir," I muttered back without lifting my head. "My mother and sisters can't thank you enough for saving Jamila's life just now. We really do want to help you and we have had an idea." "Can I tell you?" "Please don't be offended though. It's just a suggestion." "Why should I be offended?" "Just that many men would." Anyway, you are quite small and we think that if you were really prepared to accept the change, we can dress you as a woman and we can all get through together. Until that actual moment I had never doubted my position as a man, in every way superior to that of women. Was I really going to lower myself now? They were there to serve me, it was written. Just at that moment there was a sudden burst of gunfire and a man staggered out of the crowd, hopping on one leg, trailing a line of blood in the dusty road, and a roar went up from the crowd. Immediately the police closed the gate and stood in a line across its entrance. That brought home to me that getting any further than that dusty street was going to be really difficult, if not impossible, without some help. Casting my pride aside, I said, "Okay, but how?" Malika said, "I am going to walk around that corner to look as though I want to pee, and I'll leave a spare burqa there." There really did not seem to be anything at all better, so I sat until she had gone and come back. Then I waited a couple of minutes for everything to settle down, before nonchalantly wandering behind the building. There on a low wall was a dark bundle of clothing, which I quickly opened up. I had watched my mother dressing many times, so managed to flip the black cloth over my head easily, except I'd managed to get it back to front. I twisted it round, only just in time to be confronted by a policeman. He had clearly come to relieve himself and very brusquely told me to get back with the women's group. I hesitated as I could see the bottom of my jeans showing, and prayed that he had not noticed, so took a chance. I would drop them as soon as I could. I crossed over to the women by the gate to be grasped immediately by Malika, who hugged me and told me to look after her young nephew Ishmael. We stood in a huddle with a ring of police separating us from the men, which was just as well because I had not got used to looking through the slits of my hijab, so holding on to Ishmael more or less left me where I was. It was the ideal time to step out of my jeans and kick them away. Shaking the burqa down to ground level, I left them on the ground. Suddenly, with a lot of shouting, the gates opened and I was swept through it with the women while still hanging on to a mystified child. Once through, there stuck on the sand in front of us was a large boat with a wooden ramp leading up onto its deck. The older children just ran up it whilst the flock of us women clambered onto the boat, trying not to drop anything. When no more could get aboard, the ramp was taken away, and after a lot of shouting its engine started and the boat slowly backed into the sea and turned round. So far so good. We were going at last to Italy and a new life. The sea was not very rough, but motion sickness affected quite a few and most of us took off our hijabs just in case. We were so crammed together that we had to take it in turns to sit. The children pushed themselves between the clumps of women. Standing was very difficult, having to grab each other, so we squatted if we could on the deck, bumping into each other as the boat rolled. The children all thought it was fun and wandered off. After a very long time there was a muttering and several ran back to us pointing forwards, and there in the distance we could see a collection of low buildings. Slowly they got larger and we could see the walls of a harbor getting closer, until we passed through the entrance. Finally the engine's noise reduced and with a shuddering thump we had arrived, with much yelling as ropes were thrown from the boat to the men standing above us on the jetty. All the women of the group around me instantly stood up, collected their bundles and tried to climb up the plank to the jetty. Bit by bit we sorted ourselves out and managed it, together with the youngsters. Once we had all got off the ship we were herded as group along to the end of the quay where a number of officials directed us to some waiting lorries. On the way to them we were offered bottles of water and a stick of bread, which I quickly finished, having had nothing for a long time. A few of the older women quickly put their head covers back on, but being able to breathe freely and see at last, meant that we young didn't bother, we just draped our scarves over our hair. I was glad that Malika had left one for me earlier and had almost forgotten about having it. After quite a short while the bus stopped alongside a large building and we poured out into it, a long room, with at the end a couple of tables with smartly dressed officials sitting ready for us. Bit by bit I slowly reached them as the crowd moved on out of the building. I was getting more and more scared that I'd be found out and get arrested, but to my relief when I got in front of the table, the first official glanced at me and in coarse Arabic asked me my name and age. I said Samir, 18. He said Salah, looking up at me, so I nodded and he typed out a form, a copy of which he folded and gave to me. Not only was I dressed like a woman, but I now had a girl's name and he had given me a second's glance. And that was it. I was now in Italy and legally so, complete with official papers. As I moved on to leave with everybody else, I saw a well-dressed Italian woman watching us pass by. Suddenly she pointed a girl out to another official, and as I passed by did the same to me, and he beckoned me aside hurriedly and pointed to two girls standing nearby. I guessed that I was to join them immediately, though naturally I was scared that I had been spotted as not being a woman and that I'd now be arrested and deported. But no, from there we were taken outside to a large car and the three of us climbed into the back. Whatever, I still seemed undetected. By now I was really weary and I must have fallen asleep soon after we left, because I woke suddenly to find that we were in the center of a large city. I had never seen so many people or cars before. We stopped at the back of a large brick building where the smartly dressed woman was standing waiting for our arrival. We put our hands together to her all in of welcome, before she let us inside. Before we do anything, there are the restrooms, go and freshen up and we'll meet when you are ready, here. What a wonderful room. It was bright shiny white and full of mirrors and several little rooms all with china bins of water. There seemed to be nowhere to squat, so hoisted my burqa and pulled off my pants. It sounded as though that was okay, but there was no water for my right hand. So I used a couple of bits of paper from a box on the wall instead. We three then came together and went out to a big room covered with large colored pictures of women in different clothes and big soft cushions. There the woman offered us some orange juice and many different cakes, which we quickly cleared as she talked. Well, welcome again. I am Greta and I want to tell you why we have brought you here away from your friends. We are an international company promoting women's clothes to the Arabic countries. What we want to do is to produce a range of exciting and pretty designs for women of all ages to wear about in the privacy of their own homes, not to offend religious guidance. The market is enormous and we are the first to really work at it. There are thousands of girls who want to show off to their friends, but at present can't. From underwear to everything else. Just think about it. Here in Milan we have several wonderful designers aiming at those very women. You three girls were selected today at the harbor by me, a company director, for your specifically classic looks. At that she pointed to a screen and there were several photos of the three of us from different angles, which must have been taken after we left the ship, though we had not been aware of anybody with a camera. We would like you to work for us. We need you to model the latest fashions which we shall photograph. In return we shall house and feed you and pay you while you train. If you agree with what I have described, then we ask you to change out of your clothes, take a shower and put on what is in these bags. She pointed to 3 plastic bags on a table. Malika and I looked at each other and went to pick one up. Miriam shook her head. No, I want to be with my family. Please take me back to them. That really made me stop. What was I getting into? Was this why I had traveled so far and put up with so much? Should I go back with her? But then I'd be no better off at all and might well get imprisoned if they found out I had arrived illegally. For that matter, I was a man, and by pretending to be a woman was tribally a major step backward, which was against all we believed in and would take a lot of adjustment and loss of face, let alone status. But, so far things looked good here, and if I fitted in then with the money I could drop out after a while and get another job more suited to a man. I hung onto my bag and went after Malika back into the shiny room. There we stripped separately and discreetly and showered. I called out, "When you've finished I'll stay here until you have dressed and I'll put on everything meanwhile." That was easier said than done. I emptied the bag onto a shelf and sorted out underwear, socks, jeans and t-shirt. Everything was quite stretchy and I managed to get most on, but not an odd thing with 2 pouches and dangling straps. I stepped out and waved it at Malika, who burst out laughing. "That's for your top, all modern girls wear one. Did not your mother wear one? It's called a bra? Here, I'll show you how to put it on." With a quick flip she grabbed an arm and dropped a strap over it and got it clipped behind my back with the straps over my shoulders. She paused, then reached out and grabbed a bunch of paper sheets which she pushed into the pouches on either side, which made them stick out. "If this is going to work for us, then I'm going to have to teach you girly things, otherwise you'll get sent packing. So are you going to agree to that, or will man's pride still get in the way?" "That would be wonderful. Please take over. I certainly need all the help I can get. Now get your t-shirt on and let's go." "No, wait while I do something with your mess of hair. There's so much for you to learn." With that she ran her fingers through it on either side several times, smoothing it down. "That's better, let's go." Back in the office, Greta was waiting. That must feel a lot easier, girls. Now we can go to your rooms. Let me remember, you are Malika and Solwa, right? By the way, I've got your entry visas here safe. Later there will be some documents for you to sign, and tomorrow there will be a photo shoot so that the managers can see what you both can look like, but enough, you must both be hungry. She pressed something on her desk and spoke rapidly at it, then she led us down a long passage and stopped at a pair of doors which opened, and we three stepped into a small room, which suddenly moved upwards. It stopped, then the twin doors opened and we walked across to another door. She swung it open for us. Inside was a mix of furniture, 2 beds and a cooking space. In the middle was a table with several glossy magazines scattered across it, all showing women in a variety of colored clothes. Here you are, girls, this is your home now, and here comes your meal. With that, an elderly woman appeared with a tray, heaped with bowls of food. We sat on our beds and emptied everything. That is much better, I said. Now I feel like sleeping, but I really need you to help me, Malika, if I am going to be any good at what Greta has described. Yes, to be honest, I did not like the way you were eating just now. You must take much smaller portions and sip the water. Also, you must hold back at all times when we are together and not try to lead, but enough, tomorrow we'll work at it seriously. With that, she lay back on her bed and promptly went off to sleep. It took me a lot longer. I was still worried about what I was letting myself in for, and woke several times during the night arguing with myself, should I or should not I? I had obviously lost my man status, but I could always get it back by just leaving Malika and the business. A knock at the door woke me to find that Malika was up and already dressed. She opened the door and in came an Arab woman with a fresh tray of food. Greta says she will collect you both in half an hour. It seemed much less than that, but we got into the little moving room again, this time to go down. We entered a large space with very bright lights and half a dozen people. Greta introduced us to the group and shortly left. Immediately 2 of them took over and said that they were already waiting, and then led us to a couple of tall chairs in front of a large mirror surrounded by bright lights and a shelf covered with a multitude of pots, tubes and brushes. I was made to sit down and the chair turned facing the room, and then quickly a girl draped a cloth over my shoulders. She stroked my chin and hesitated briefly. Unlike many of my friends who had beards, all I had ever had was a layer of whiskers. She moistened my face and worked a handful of strong-smelling paste all over it. After a few minutes she got me to wash it all off in the basin in front of me. A sludgy mess disappeared down a hole in the bottom. Then she got to work with brushes and dipped fingers working all over my face. Something stuck on my eyelids and a greasy stick parted my lips. The dabbing and brushing seemed to go on forever, but at last she seemed satisfied. I had not been able to see what she had been doing until now, when she moved aside and lifted my face and pointed at the mirror. Looking back at me was a startlingly pretty girl, bright red lips and long, long eyelashes. I put my hand up to my mouth and so did she. I patted my hair, so did she. A flood of thoughts flashed through my head. Could I get away with it all? Mainly yes, I could certainly go through with it if this is what I looked like. I now turned towards Malika next to me. She looked absolutely wonderful and we waved to each other. After a quick conversation behind us, the cloths were removed and together we were taken over to the others who were standing by 2 clusters of bright lights on tall stands. Hello girls, I am Roberto and I am going to photograph you too. I shall want to take the pictures from different angles, some close up. All you need to do is smile and do what I say. His Arabic was not very good, but understandable. Click, click and on, head up, down, to the side, hand on chin with breaks, when he went over to a screen to see what he had taken. At long last he said okay, and then Malika joined me. Close up I could see what a very different face she now had, bright lips, smoky eyes, flushed cheeks. Before I could say anything she said, Sola, I can't believe what a beautiful girl you are. You will get the job, I'm so certain. Have not you looked in the mirror? Here, let me show you. She led me to one of the big wall mirrors. I looked as I had earlier. There in t-shirt and jeans was a strikingly pretty girl. I put up my hands to both cheeks and pouted my bright red lips, and so did the image. I fluttered my long eyelashes, so did she. Well, though I say it myself, I was without doubt the girl they were looking for. My nighttime doubts and unhappiness vanished completely. That said, I was not alone. Malika, no, you are wrong, you are so much prettier, please do take the job, you must be exactly what they are looking for. Before we could do anything, Greta appeared and said, that has been a great success, the bosses have seen the pictures and are really delighted. I am to offer you both a contract. Basically, you must agree not to work for anybody else, and remember that all the photos are ours. We shall pay you €100 a week, let you have your flat free, and any clothes not accepted for modeling are yours. We have arranged with a local boutique to let you have 3 sets of lingerie of your choice in Solwa. The bosses are planning to promote a new brand of underwear as well, later, and so I'd like you to go on a course of special tablets to improve your figure. What do you think, Dot? With that, Malika hugged me tight and said, oh, do let's stay together, and agreed to take what they are offering. I was still in a mental turmoil, it all sounded too good to be true. Here was I, country boy with no skills, being offered a wonderful dream job if I took the pills. Well, I could always stop taking them, I supposed. So yes. That sounds wonderful, we agree. What happens now? Well, tomorrow you will come and learn how to pose for me. There is much to learn, said Roberto. That's it for today, girls. You can go back to your rooms. Ciao. So off we went, and when we got there, we found several boxes on the table, which we naturally just had to open. Inside were sets of underwear, pink, white, black and red. Some frilly and lacy, others plain sleek satin. Malika squealed in delight and tipped the lot out on the table. Look, they've got our sizes right, isn't that clever? I had never seen anything like it and had another shaft of doubt. It was one thing being photographed briefly, quite another wanting to wear such flimsy things every day into the future. She quickly pulled out several pink and one red set and held them up against her body, put them down and tried again. I certainly was not going to think of wearing red or black, so sorted out 3 white plain without frills and threw them onto my bed. Malika could not decide until she had picked through everything, and even then she ended up with 5 sets. Sola, please help me choose, I have absolutely no idea. At home my sisters all wear plain white cotton underclothes. Okay, but you did ask, don't complain, the red looks terrible, but I like the pink ones with frilly bits. Hold them up against you one by one. No, yes, yes, no, yes. Just then there was a knock at the door and a woman brought in a tray of food. We hurriedly sorted out what we wanted to keep and what was to be left. She said something in Italian, pointing at the collection laughingly. We had both missed a couple of loose small bags. I grabbed one and out popped a soft cone of pink jelly, which I dropped in surprise before picking it up. The woman patted me on my chest over the crunched up tissue and giggled. Malika joined her, before in a fit of giggles, slipping one and then the other into my pouch as the woman clapped her hands. Bella leant back as though pretending to admire me, waved and went to leave, then stopped. She handed me a screw of foil. My pills. That does look a lot better, really natural, let's have our supper now. I had not realized how hungry I was, nor how tired as well, but I swallowed the couple of tablets quickly. The next thing I knew was waking up with the sun streaming into the apartment. Sola, wake up, we are supposed to be ready for the studio in half an hour. I could see from the heap of clothes that she had been trying on everything already, before settling for the pink frilly set that she was now wearing. Come on, you have to choose, you can't keep wearing the same stuff for days. Here, this shiny pair should suit you today. With that she threw them over me. So I grabbed the panties and swapped those I had on, and this time managed to get the bra changed fairly easily, complete with the twin jellies. Jeans and t-shirt quickly covered her choice. Just as well as a knock at the door to let us know we should leave. Down to the studio, Roberto was there waiting for us. Good morning, girls, I am ready now to teach you, but perhaps get your makeup freshened up first. Once again we were sat down and the routine that we would soon get used to was started, then over to Roberto. He was surrounded by a ring of bright lights which were all pointing towards a long padded bench. That's a lot better, the pair of you. Now we are going to learn how to work for the camera. You must remember the different positions and practice again and again until it's automatic. We spent the rest of the day twisting our bodies, standing, sitting, lying, smiling. laughing, then going over them again and again until we collapsed in exhaustion. The break for lunch was a dream. I had never been so tired in my life. There was a lot more to this than I'd ever thought, yet Malika was just smiling away, trying to chat to everybody. Right, girls, well done. Tomorrow we shall let you see blow-ups of the photos and you can see how to get things right, learn and practice to improve. You are nearly there. Ciao. Well, that was what we did all the next day and the next and the next, until he was happy with our efforts. We compared our photos and congratulated each other sometimes and collapsed in a fit of giggles at others. I was not so tired by now, and each night we chatted over supper while teasing each other by striking different poses. She showed me how to let my wrists go slack and how to look up into a man's face and to keep a smile showing my teeth all the time. One morning as I rolled over in bed, I could feel a squashy mass between the mattress and my chest while, as my hand wandered across, I found it was actually two separate swellings. That explained why I had been itching there sometimes recently. I was growing boobs. I had vaguely noticed for the past week that when I peed, things down below seemed to have got a bit smaller, but hadn't really thought much about it. Though my panties did fit a lot better than to begin with, I realized, and rather than search for my bits when I need to pee, I was finding it a lot simpler to just lift the hem of whatever I was wearing and sit. Come the next week we were well into our routine and turned up in the studio as we learned it was called, almost our first Italian word. What a change this time. It was full of racks of clothes, long, short, bright, dull colors. Roberto greeted us and introduced us to a smart but plainly dressed woman, Carlotta. He told us that she was the boss and she would decide who was to wear what and when, and that she immediately did. Grabbing Malika's arm, she pulled her along the rows, plucking dresses out and throwing them over her shoulder, then did the same with me. Having pushed us away into the corner, she turned to Roberto and rattled off something in Italian, whilst waving in our direction. It was clear from that we should be getting out of our jeans and into whatever was top of our piles immediately. We dropped everything from our arms onto a couple of chairs and picked up the topmost dress, then looked at each other. Just how did they go on? Well, we soon found out as one by one we put them on so that Carlotta could decide what she wanted. Some were like a burqa and just dropped over our heads, making sure that the front was properly in front. Some were tight and got hooked up on our boobs, but others you had to step into an opening partway down at the back of the dress, then zip everything up. Wasn't that a clever thing, I thought, but at the same time I found that I was quite pleased at how I looked. In fact, for the last week or so I found that I was really looking forward to wearing something attractive and pretty every day. Malika and I couldn't help giggling, but Carlotta was getting more and more annoyed and finally just grabbed us both as we were and marched us over to Roberto, who shrugged his shoulders and sat us down in front of the lights. He waved over the makeup girls, who had been hovering about, and they got to work repairing the damage done by putting on and off so many dresses. Once they were happy they left us, and from then on we stood and bent and twisted in every position that Roberto mined to us, always smiling at his camera until she was satisfied. It seemed forever. He must have taken literally hundreds of photos. It seemed never ending, and both of us were getting really tired as we had to hold so many unnatural poses for what felt like hours. It seemed as though every part of our bodies had had enough, everything ached. He shooed us away, so we changed back into our jeans and sat awaiting something to happen whilst everybody else seemed equally anxious. The makeup girls tidied their stations, the lighting engineers shifted the lamps, and Roberto sat gazing at the ceiling. After what seemed forever, Carlotta appeared wreathed in smiles. Clutching a tablet computer, she told us that she had sent the photos to the other directors of the company and that they had all been delighted with the results and that she was happy to offer us the posts of permanent models for the company. What was more was that this was the year that the city promoted fashion, and already a special week was being heavily advertised around the world to show off the latest styles, and the company had applied successfully to take part. Malika put her arms around me and hugged me tight and asked if I was happy with all that. Well, why not? We had got so far in the last few weeks and it all looked good. So I nodded and she told Carlotta that we both agreed. Well, from then on things got really frantic, and each evening we just collapsed after eating, well except once. Roberto one day said that he was going to a high-end party at the weekend and he'd like to have us both to accompany him, and he had asked Carlotta if it was okay. Naturally Malika was all for it, but I really was frightened of having to fit in with something that was so different from anything I'd ever known and as somebody that I was not. Though on thinking more about that I felt that it didn't matter at all, after all I was me. So we thanked him but said that we would want him to tell us what we could wear as neither of us had any idea. He hesitated, so instead we asked the makeup girls, who were really excited for us and chattered amongst themselves. They then took us to the clothes bins where what we had worn for the photo shoots before were dumped and quickly flicked through what was there. Soon there was a small heap which they gathered up and made us stand while they held up one dress after the other against us. Quite quickly they ended up with a dress or so for each of us. Malika was really enjoying herself and soon accepted a floaty dress with puffy sleeves covered in flowers. Actually, I could not make up my mind, and so in despair one of the girls insisted that I put on a bright red dress which was quite tight about my legs and with a pair of thin straps at the top. After deciding that was right for me, she turned to the others and said, "Ecco Donna Scarlatta." Everybody laughed except me. I had no idea what she meant. Actually, until then I had not realized that I now had a pair of quite large breasts, which had been increasing slowly in size over the last month or so, and I had just got used to them being there. Anyway, they almost filled the top of the dress, but partially stuck out above its top, held up by the straps. Fortunately, the tight skirt stopped above my knees, so walking about was not as difficult as I expected. The rest of the week shot by, and by Saturday we were both really excited and delighted when Roberto arrived to take us to the party. Now he was dressed very smartly, nothing like his usual shirt and jeans, in a cream suit, blue shirt and red striped tie. He led us to a large car at the back entrance, opened the doors and invited us in, taking Solwa's arm to put her in the front seat, which left me alone in the back. Except I was not. Inside was an equally well-dressed older man, who welcomed me. I had no option but to join him. Being so close to a complete stranger and a man at that had a most odd feeling upon me. I turned and smiled, saying buonasera, and was really pleased that his quick glance was of approval. I settled in and could tell that he was concentrating on me rather than what Roberto was saying. The last few weeks must have had an effect on the way I thought about things, because I carefully tugged the hem of the dress down towards my cross knees, something I'd never have bothered about before. And then he leaned across me to fix my car belt. He did seem closer than necessary, but briefly I was pleased at his attention. Quite soon Roberto drove us through the gateway of a large private house, surrounded by a garden with fountains. Our doors were opened for us and we were led by a maid through the large doors of the house, through the wide hall into an ornate room at the end from which music and the sound of laughter came. There were several couples standing about, but to our surprise Carlotta appeared and came across to us and said, "Let me introduce you to our host." Malika and I looked at each other. This was nothing like what we had imagined, but we followed her across the room to meet him. As we worked through the crowd, I could feel that several of the men were more than casually glancing at the pair of us. Well, why not? Weren't we top fashion models? We found ourselves in front of an elderly man, sitting deeply in a heavily cushioned chair. Carlotta spoke slowly. "These are the two girls I told you about before. What do you think?" He spent a while looking us up and down, then indicated with his cigar that we should turn around, and then the other way and back again. Then just one word. See with that she took us by the arm and led us back to Roberto, who had obviously been watching and wreathed with smiles, hugged us both. Turning to Carlotta, he launched off into a flood of words, nodding in the old man's direction as he did so. "My dears, perhaps I should tell you more. The reason why you were both invited this evening was so that the Count, who had heard all about you too, could decide whether he was interested in having both of you as part of his clothing empire. If so, then you will both leave us. And he is and you are. Now that's all over, let's go and meet the others." That did not take long. We were quickly joined by a group of young men, who introduced themselves most charmingly. Each one wanted to get us a drink, but of course for us alcohol is forbidden, so we settled for orange juice, though that had a slightly odd taste and soon made me feel a bit dizzy. One Alfredo insisted that we dance together, holding me so tight that my breasts almost climbed out of my dress and his knee pressed deep between my legs and the fingers of his hand pressing deep into my buttocks. Suddenly as we swung about he kissed me. I wasn't expecting anything like that, and then he did it again. It was a relief when one of the others took over, holding me loosely as I tried to move to the music. I glanced at Malika and could see she was having the same trouble. Our tunes were not their tunes. Fortunately, Roberto had seen that we were not coping and came over to ask if we were ready to go home. We just nodded, separated from the men and followed him back to his car, then quickly we got in and arrived back at our room. We were both distinctly weary after last night but managed to get to work though later than usual, but settled down at our makeup stations ready for the new day and next modeling session. Hardly had Carlotta walked in when 3 men appeared at the door and walked up to her. One obviously, some sort of official carrying a leather bag, the other 2 probably policemen in smart black uniforms, peaked caps and many badges. The first man stood in the middle of the studio and spoke rapidly, a bit like a machine. Neither of us could understand a word, but it clearly involved the pair of us because he kept pointing at us. Carlotta was obviously unhappy and seemed to be arguing. Roberto joined her, but the official just ignored him and finally banged his bag on a table, opened it and produced several sheets of paper which he handed over to her. He then said something to the 2 policemen who came over to Malika and me, grasped our arms and walked us out of the studio. Down the stairs we went until we were taken out into the street, where there was a large black vehicle alongside the road. People walking by stopped to see what was happening, whilst we just stood still, Malika in a multi-spotted jacket and trousers and me in a bright green short-skirted shiny dress, its hem above my knees. The driver got out of the front and led us round to the back where he opened up the 2 doors and indicated that we should get in. The policemen were not gentle and shoved us up the steps, high heels and all. Once inside we found that we were not alone, because there, even in the dim blue light as we sat down we realized that there were 2 other women here. If we looked oddly dressed, they outclassed us. Their faces were made up way beyond any levels that we had been for the cameras. They had almost transparent blouses, showing their underwear clearly, and their skirts were well above their knees. The doors banged shut and with a jolt the vehicle took off. The girls said something to us waving their hands at our clothes, but we couldn't understand, so we just showed the palms of our hands. The journey only took a few minutes. Hardly had we stopped than the doors were thrown open and 2 large women in dark uniforms, with their hair pulled tight in a ball, reached in and pulled us out. They wasted no time and lead us on through the tall imposing entrance of a big building, down a long flight of steps. At the bottom they handed us over to another pair of equally large women, together with a clutch of sheets of paper. Again we were half led, half prodded along a long corridor lined with separate cells with thick steel doors. At the far end we were pushed through just such an entrance, to find a cluster of women who too outclassed us in appearance in every way. Some were even just in their underclothes, bra and panties, though with very high-heeled shoes, wrapped in flimsy tops. Most had deeply plunging blouses and tiny mini skirts, lots of shiny jewelry, all finished off by tall boots, and they were all talking at the top of their voices while their flailing arms sent a lovely smelling cloud around them into the room. Our new companions dragged us into the crowd and tried their best to help us join what was clearly an established sisterhood, with much hugging and kissing. Clearly we were amongst friends, and yes, really somebody actually did call out in Arabic. A tiny woman pushed through the throng, grasped us both by our arms and pulled us into a corner at the same time as with a clang, the heavy door behind us was shut, making us all jump. There was a line of benches along the wall and she sat us down, one on each side of her. "Hello, you understand Arabic, don't you?" "I am Rosa," she asked. "I can see that you are not Italian. Are you working the streets?" We both looked blankly at her. Malika said, "No, we are fashion models for an exporting company, and we have just literally been snatched away from our job. That's very, very odd. Let me see if I can find out a bit more." So off she went, weaving amongst the gaudily dressed throng. Before very long she was back, threading through the girls in the crowd, with a smile on her face. "You will never guess. It seems that somebody at your workplace reported you to the Carabinieri. It's probably a rival fashion house employee sent to try to stop you muscling in their patch. It happens all the time apparently. How exciting. I wonder what will happen to you when they realize that you are not on the game. Perhaps the chief has plans already. You never ever know what goes on behind closed doors around here. For us it's just the usual fine in the morning and then thrown out of the law court back onto the streets till we get picked up again." Just as she finished talking, the door opened and half a dozen assorted flashily dressed women squeezed through. The crowd opened up and the earlier hugging and kissing was repeated together with much shrieking. They must have been the last round up because nobody else turned up, and bit by bit the crowd settled down, laying on the benches or the floor to doze. Some just sat in a group hugging each other. We were lucky as we were already on a bench and slept together, very roughly propped up against each other. Suddenly there was a bang as the door opened to let in a couple of officials, and we realized that it was already morning. Everybody stood up, most knowing exactly what was happening, which was sending everybody back out through the door one by one, after giving their details. Briefly our tiny friend waved as she went through the door, stuck somewhere amongst the crowd flowing through. Quite quickly they were all gone, leaving the pair of us behind in a cloud of perfume. Somehow it was clear to everybody that we were not part of the night brigade and so could not join the rest. Indeed, it was so as we were beckoned forward. We were taken to some washrooms to tidy up and then to a small office where we were sat in front of a desk alone. We sat then at last in came an obvious official and a smartly dressed man in a light gray suit with two heavily built attendants. The official spoke to us rapidly, though we could hardly understand a word. Then he stood up, waved at the other man, and left us behind. That man, to our delight, was fluent in Arabic. He told us that he had been given the job of getting us by his employers, who had seen videos of Malika and me doing our modeling and had grasped that we could make all the difference between their business and Charlotta's and of course its profitability. Their models did not compare apparently. So what did we think? He would double whatever we were being paid, which he knew wasn't very much. Just then the official returned armed with a stack of paper and spoke at length to the other man, periodically pointing with his finger at me and then to what must have been my identity documents. The other man was clearly arguing about me as he kept waving in my direction. He stood up and shouted, but to no effect. I suspected that he tried to bribe the official as he had taken out his wallet and opened it wide, but that was ignored and waved away. Finally he turned to us both and said, "Sola is not truly a girl, is she? That means that she is illegally working here in Italy and so must be sent back where she came from, and there is nothing we can do about it. It will ruin the company. We have invested so much in the next year's promotions and syndicated across Pakistan and Indonesia because we had already discussed your transfer from your owners. The authorities have apparently agreed that she can stay here until extradition can be arranged, so you might as well go back to your room, while I shall try to sort things out." I could not help myself. All my dreams of the pair of us traveling the world, showing off beautiful clothes, being taken to parties were suddenly shattered, and I burst into floods of tears, something that I had not done for many years. Malika came over to me and hugged me tight, whilst the official just looked on. He'd seen it all before, obviously. We stood up and started to leave when Malika said to Namiem, "Go on, I'll catch you up in a minute." I got back to our room and lay down and sobbed and did not hear her come in. She touched my shoulder, and as I sat up she hugged me again. "Now listen very carefully to what I am saying. I have just asked them if you had an operation to make you a girl, would that mean that you could stay here in Italy, and would the company pay for the operation?" The answer to both of my questions was yes. That is the very best thing that I can do to keep us together. What do you think? We can trust them, I am sure. We are much too valuable. Oh yes, yes of course, but how soon? I replied in a happier manner because up until just now I had been enjoying our daily dressing in pretty clothes together. I was slowly wakening and was just dimly aware of a nurse alongside me doing something to some tubes leading away from me. As everything in my head slowly began to clear, I remembered what I had agreed and why I was there lying in a hospital bed. I had to really know for certain what was the result. Ever so carefully I let my fingers wander down my body, squashing my breasts between my arms as I did so. I had not any idea that they were so large. I reached the hem of the cotton gown I was dressed in and gently pulled it up. Then one at a time, my fingers worked their way down beyond, to the top of my legs. There they touched a slight mound, over which my exploring hand led me onto an ever-deepening groove. One finger parted the edges and could have plunged in deeply but for the soreness and pain, so I withdrew it carefully. That was all I needed to know. It was done. I was now a woman. I could officially even marry and legally become a full Italian citizen. I dozed off a happy girl into a deep sleep until Malika appeared at my side, gently shaking my shoulder. Oh Solo, please do forgive me. We have been like brother and sister all this time, and I just had to do something so we could stay together, and I thought that could only be as if we were sisters. Will you forgive me plotting to do this to you? I do hope that you really do, because whilst you have been recovering here, our new employers have managed to get an Italian passport for you with everything correctly up to date, so you can go anywhere now, even America. I could not blame her really, as everything was now perfectly in place for my and her futures. I can travel the world, wear the most beautiful clothes, be admired for my looks, my pictures in women's magazines, paid lavishly and wooed by handsome men. What more could any girl want?